Hello, everyone. It's Saturday, the 7th of September, 2024, and I'm hoping that my internet is going to be a little bit better because I am not at my home. And so we'll see. The lighting, it is what it is. It is what it is. Before I get into any videos on Russiagate or are we over-medicating our children, all of that stuff that we already know the answers to, I wanted to share some pretty interesting videos that I shared on my social media.
We have 33 confirmed positive tests.
We have 33 Pennsylvanians who have tested positive for
COVID-19.
Today we have 33 cases.
There were 33 new cases.
The state of Minnesota today reported 33 new COVID-19 related deaths.
There are 33 confirmed cases in Arkansas.
That's the largest single-day increase so far, raising the total to 33.
33.
There were 33 confirmed cases in North Carolina.
33.
There was 33 everywhere.
Yes.
I think that was Red Team Go. I think 33 is like Red Team Go. Everybody goes, okay, let's do it. It's time.
Yeah, 100%.
Dude, there's like literally 1,033s and 33 new cases. 33 people died in fucking Hong Kong.
The number 33, we all know what that represents. Everywhere, every single day, it was like, well, 12 more cases, which now brings the state to 33.
Yes.
We had 32 cases today.
Yes.
We had 11 cases, which now it's 33. 33 more people. I'm going, oh my God, how dumb do you have to see to not understand this is going on? Yeah, that was green light go. We're off to the races.
Yeah. You've been subject to propaganda and lies by people who are very well trained in how they do that. If you find one thing your government has said which is clearly not true, I ask you this: why would you believe anything else they've told you?
So that's from he calls himself Jay Neezy on social media. Yeah, I've gone to I've gone to business lunches, talked to him multiple times, and we do share a lot of content with each other as well. So he's like really friggin' smart. So I would highly encourage people to take a look at his social media platforms, and he's right about a lot of stuff. I became aware of him during the COVID era period. Anyway, this is just another story I wanted to bring up. Quebec allegedly detained someone that was about to carry out an ISIS attack on Jewish people within the New York region. The person's name was Mohammed Shazeb Khan, 20, who was arrested in Ormstown, Quebec on Wednesday. U.S. authorities said Friday he was plotting a gun and knife attack on a Jewish center in Brooklyn, New York on the October 7th, for the anniversary of the events that happened last year. I think that's true.
Eric Weinstein just proved how easy it is to get ChatGPT to admit that the modern authoritarian left, led by figures like Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Keir Starmer, mirrors some of the darkest totalitarian regimes in our history. Weinstein asked ChatGPT to imagine a modern political party based on the following traits. 1. It puts state-run schools above parents' rights over their own children. 2. It pushes for equality of outcome over a fair playing field. 3. It views free speech as a threat to public safety. 4. It supports candidates chosen by party elites, not through primary elections. 5. It endorses irreversible self-sterilization as part of the kindergarten to 12 curriculum. And 6. It doesn't want voters to show ID. Sound familiar? Then he asked, based on that description, what political party this most resembles in history, and ChatGPT's response should be a wake-up call. It pointed to totalitarian regimes where control over children's education was key to brainwashing the next generation. It also flagged the focus on equity and redistribution that comes at the expense of individual freedom, like we see in socialist and communist ideologies. It named regimes where free speech is crushed, education is used to control, and party leaders choose who's allowed to run for office. In those countries, Stalin's USSR, Hitler's Nazi Germany, Maoist China, North Korea, and modern Venezuela. Now, we all hear warnings about the so-called far right, but this begs another question. When does the left go too far, and has it already? Eric Weinstein just proved how easy it is to get...
GDP per capita.
Eric Weinstein just proved how...
GDP per capita under your government in 6 of the last 7 consecutive quarters has declined. That's the steepest decline.
This is regarding Canada again.
Outside of a recession. Again, like, why do you keep saying you're going to continue delivering on stuff that Canadians doesn't feel is actually changing their life for the better? You've had 9 years.
Just today, Vashi, the Bank of Canada did issue another interest rate cut, and
nothing to do with you. Interest rate cuts with the Bank of Canada, not like
these are because of policies that we have put in place. I mean, we came out of the COVID pandemic into a very difficult world.
You led us into a pandemic, okay, and then made our lives difficult then with the lockdowns and all that stuff, where people like myself couldn't work, couldn't go to school, couldn't go to the gym, couldn't go to a restaurant, couldn't travel, couldn't see my family for over 2 years at that point, because we lived in different provinces, and sharing the information that was debunking the original trials, that was debunking what the medical experts were saying, government, medical, and scientific data, like I said, that discussed the VAERS, the side effects, the concerns about myocarditis, pericarditis, turbo cancers, blood clots, spontaneous abortions, miscarriages due to the vaccine, all that stuff. And yeah, so there's no hindsight.
GDP per capita.
There's no hindsight. Anyway, that was it for my social media, Instagram. Just thought it'd be interesting to break it up a little bit, but which do I want to share first? Yeah, I'll do Russiagate 3.0 by someone I really like watching, Press for Truth, Dan Dixon, Canadian. Pressing play would help.
This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, and it looks like Russiagate 3.0 has just apparently been launched. As we see here from this Zero Hedge article, popular conservatives have allegedly been tricked into a $10 million Russian influence campaign. This is according to the Department of Justice. And here is the indictment. It's the United States of America versus these two Russians who are working for Russia Today, a state-controlled media outlet funded and directed by the government of Russia. So these two RT employees indicted for covertly funding and directing a U.S. company that published thousands of videos in furtherance of Russian interests. The U.S. company in question is Tenant Media, and it's owned by Lauren Chen and her husband, and they've hired these 6 commentators to be a part of the team. I'm familiar with 5 of these people. In fact, I know 2 of them personally, Tim Poole and Lauren Southern. But let's look at what the indictment says here. We see
I can pull up the indictment as well, just to show you that it's something I verified before I shared the video, which so you can see the actual indictment right here from the US. It's from justice.gov. And yeah, I can verify that what he is saying, Dan Dix, is accurate. And what else will I share? Well, I'll show from the site itself. So you can go through that on your own too, if you have any questions. And so this is Office of Public Affairs, U.S. Department of Justice. This was posted Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. Excuse me. Employees of Russia state-controlled media outlet deployed nearly $10 million to publish RT-curated content, which garnered millions of views through a Tennessee-based online content creation company. And anyway. Back to Dan Dix.
Founder 1 and founder 2, and that's Lauren Chen and her husband, along with allegedly the Russians here, worked together to deceive 2 U.S. online commentators, Commentator 1 and Commentator 2, who respectively have over 2.4 million and 1.3 million YouTube subscribers. Now, it's not hard to figure out who these commentators are. because we, already know they work for Tenet Media. Commentator 1 has 2.4 million subscribers. So that is obviously Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report with his 2.4 million subscribers. And commenter 2 with his 1.3 million YouTube subscribers is obviously Tim Pool with his 1.3 million subscribers. And I got to say, it's strange for me to see people I personally know being involved in this Russia collusion, meme. Lauren Southern, for example, I've known her for like almost a decade. We've done a bunch of videos together. Tim Pool as well. I've known him for just as long as a time, and it's pretty wild, the accusations that are being put against these people and some of the others. When you look at the headlines like this one, new indictment alleges conservative media company took millions from Kremlin cash. Or this, conservative influencers.
Daily Mail, Melissa Koenig, September 5th, 2024. Daily Mail,
into working for Russia as a media company indicted for sprawling $10 million covert project. Well-known right-wing influencers duped to work for covert Russian operations, U.S. prosecutors say. Doesn't all this sound very familiar, folks? You've got this anonymous Twitter account with 7.7 million followers saying, Tim Pool has been outed as a Russian propagandist. And I think it's important to point out, guys, that Anonymous certainly cannot be trusted. They are a faceless organization who should never have been trusted. The Biden administration is actually responding to this, saying they're going to hit Russia with sanctions for trying to manipulate U.S. opinion ahead of the election. Check this out.
Breaking news, the Biden administration taking a series of actions to target what they allege are attempts by Russian-backed actors to manipulate public opinion here in the U.S. ahead of the presidential election, according to 2 senior U.S. officials. Joining us now is NBC's Ken Delanian. Ken, what more have we learned?
Jose, this is being described by our sources as a whole-of-government action designed to target Russian propaganda and disinformation aimed at interfering in the 2024 election.
Oh, man, this sounds so familiar. Why? Because we saw it in 2016, we saw it in 2020, and we're seeing it again in 2024. By the way, MSNBC is a U.S. propaganda channel that is putting out a piece about Russian propaganda. Vladimir Putin himself is laughing at all of this. Today, he just put out a video while he's smirking, saying that he's going to support Kamala Harris after American spy agencies said that Russian election meddling favors Donald Trump as they launch their effort to counter Kremlin election interference. Now, Tim Pool has since put out an official statement regarding these allegations by the DOJ. He says, should these allegations prove to be true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. So there's a lot to unpack here, guys, and we're going to cover all of this in this video and much, much more. But really quickly, just before we do, I'd ask that you check me out at pressfortruth.ca/donate if you appreciate my efforts to bring you this information, because guess who doesn't receive a monthly check or a $100,000 a week or anything like these commentators are at Press for Truth. All right, guys, let's jump into it. This is the official release from the DOJ, an indictment charging Russian nationals, these 2, I'm not going to try to pronounce their names, are charged with conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act and conspiracy to commit money laundering, which was unsealed today in the Southern District of New York. The 2 Russians are apparently still at large. The Justice Department has charged 2 employees of RT, a Russian state-controlled media outlet, in a $10 million scheme to create and distribute content to U.S. audiences with hidden Russian government messaging, said Attorney General Merrick Garland. The Justice Department will not tolerate any attempts by an authoritarian regime to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas in order to covertly further its own propaganda efforts. And our investigation into this matter is ongoing. So let's look at this investigation of theirs. Where here it says on or about February 8th, 2023, Founder 1, and that is Lauren Chen or her husband. Founder 1 and Founder 2 are Lauren Chen and her husband, reported to Persona 1, which is allegedly one of the Russians, that Commentator 1 and Commentator 2, Rubin and Tim Pool, and what they had to say in terms of their negotiations. Commentator 1, Dave Rubin, said it's going to need to be closer to $5 million a year for him to be interested. $5 million a year he was asking for. And Commentator 2 said it's likely going to take $100,000 a week per episode for this to make it worthwhile. So, they're both asking for upwards of nearly $500,000 a month. And, I'll obviously put this in the description below so you can check it out all for yourself. It's a 32-page indictment. I've read the whole thing. And just to sum it up for you a little bit, once they pitched their offer and the other people agreed, and they're like, okay, we're moving forward on this. According to the indictment, both Rubin and Tim Pool asked these people, where is the money coming from, right? A very good, legitimate question. In the case of Tim Pool, he was told he would get a cell phone conversation with whoever the money is coming from. That obviously did not happen because according to the indictment, they made up a fake guy named Edward Gregarian. Rubin wasn't necessarily buying it. He's looking up this guy's name and he can't find him anywhere. So he asks for something, anything, a link, a profile. Just show us who this guy is and where the money's coming from. And according to the indictment, what was sent back to them was this false, fake profile of this guy who doesn't exist to tell them that this is indeed where the money is coming from. And apparently that was enough for Poole and Rubin to say, okay, let's move forward on this. Now, the big question of this whole thing surrounds the creation and distribution of content to U.S. audiences with hidden Russian government messaging. I want you to remember that as we look at Tim Pool's official statement here regarding these very serious allegations. Sorry, I didn't change it back there. Yeah, we're going to create to distribute content to U.S. audiences with hidden Russian government messaging. So here it is. Here's his official statement, and this is important. The Culture War podcast was licensed by Tenet Media. It existed well before any license agreement with Tenet, and it will continue to exist after any such agreement expires. The only change with the agreement was that the location of the live broadcast is moved to Tenet's YouTube channel. I and the Culture War never produced any content for Tenet Media. Never at any point did anyone other than I have full editorial control of the show, and the contents of the show are often apolitical. He goes on to say the show is produced in its entirety by our own local team without any input from anyone external to the company. And the other guy who I'm not so familiar with here also chimed in on this with something similar. He says, I want to be as clear as possible. I was never directed to report on any topic and had complete freedom and control over my reporting at all times. I would never agree to any arrangement where I am not the sole person in charge of the stories that I cover and the content that I create. So what these guys are saying is, what we have been saying has not been influenced by these people whatsoever. And I must say, I have no fault in these people for accepting money, even $100,000 a week, just because some other company wants them to post their content on their channel instead of theirs. You know what? Good for you. You've been working hard. You deserve something like that. So I'm not here. I don't think that these people were deceived by the Russians to carry out Russian propaganda towards the American people. Unfortunately, I think what these particular commentators have done is they've contributed and added to the false left-right paradigm and this notion that the Russian collusion meme is like outside of that. Like, I want to point you to this article from 2022 where it says the FBI knew that Russiagate was a lie, but they hid the truth. The FBI knew that the Trump-Russia collusion narrative was utter bunk, even as it suggested otherwise to Congress, the courts, and the public. Early in 2017, evidence revealed by special counsel John Durham proves it beyond dispute. So just to recap, back in 2016, after, Hillary lost the election, they were trying to say that it was a Russian disinformation campaign. It was Russian interference into the election. That's why Donald Trump got in. And it later came out that was not true. Completely false, totally fake, not true at all. And then you fast forward 4 years and they did it again in 2020, with the Hunter Biden laptop conspiracy where the U.S. government was saying that's just Russian disinformation, that they're trying to discredit the Biden information in this thing here so they could get Trump elected. That's a bunch of nonsense. And then, of course, it came out to be true. The Hunter Biden laptop conspiracy is real, and the Kremlin had nothing to do with it. And now, fast forward 4 more years, and here we're being led to believe that the Kremlin is funding these influencers in an effort to drum up support for Donald Trump. Again, guys, this entire Russian collusion meme is only playing into the false lie that your vote matters, and that they're not just two wings of the same bird.
Which they are.
And unfortunately, like I said, that's where these guys, have potentially gone wrong. It's not that they're being duped by, the Kremlin. I think they've, somewhat are being used by the deep state to continue to push the narrative that voting in a politician like Donald Trump is actually going to, solve your problems moving forward. So again, I don't take any issue with the money these guys accepted because of their good work that was simply going to be posted on this website or their channel. And I think the Russian collusion meme is just a bunch of bunk nonsense, just like it has been time and time again. But I do think that unfortunately what all of this does is it adds to, again, the false left-right paradigm and this notion that that your vote somehow matters, and that like as if the Russians even could, get involved in U.S. politics to this degree.
Well, everyone's involved in politics. So. Okay, moving on. Because yes, left and right, same bird. I don't buy that that Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and these types were victimized, and I don't agree with everything that they share either. I think they got it wrong on what was going on in Israel and Palestine. I think they got it wrong for COVID. I think they got it wrong for there's so many different things, and there's a bias, and they're not calling out corruption within Ukraine either. Some of these people, and so I don't know. On to Mark Hyman, and brought on a very interesting guest, Dr. Marty Macri. And interesting story. I didn't watch this video specifically, but I've watched interviews that he has conducted. And so
understand what's going on here. The rise in colon cancer in young, healthy people.
Right.
Turns out that there's an association with the microbiome. Being born by C-section and going on to have colon cancer before age 50 was an association just published in JAMA Surgery.
Welcome, Marty, to the Doctor's Pharmacy Podcast. It's so good to have you. I followed your work, and honestly, I'm kind of shocking because you're a Johns Hopkins professor and you're a heretic in the middle of the belly of the beast.
Right.
And you're kind of telling tales that we've traditionally kept secret in medicine. It's kind of like a guild, or like, it's a club, and you don't tell your neighbors or your colleagues or your friends about what's really going on in medicine and healthcare. And what's really struck me as I've been a doctor, God, for almost 40 years now is the level of co-optation and capture of medicine by industry. And it's less about healthcare, it's more about business, whether it's private equity taking over healthcare practices and emergency rooms, or whether it's, just pharma controlling policy and influencing medical education, or whether it's lack of real accountability and transparency in healthcare and medicine. You've been really outspoken about these things that we've kept quiet about for a long time as doctors. And you have, quite a pedigree, and, it means a lot coming from you. I mean, I'm just a heretic on the margins and a little fringe doctor, but
No.
you're on RD, a real doctor. I just play one on TV. And I think that, although I do see patients, but I'm kind of kidding.
Yeah, you're big time.
But I'm so excited about your work, about your new book, Blind Spots. It's a great book. Why Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Our Health. And your other books, which I think are also very compelling and touch on areas that are also quite concerning for me, which is really the lack of accountability and transparency in medicine. It's called Unaccountable: What Hospitals Won't Tell You, and How Transparency Can Revolutionize Healthcare. And another book you wrote called The Price We Pay: What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix it. I mean, why are we spending twice as much as any other nation and getting half the results? So I'd love to kind of hear how you went from being like a, revered surgeon at Johns Hopkins, where the sort of the birthplace of modern medicine with William Ulster, to kind of calling out what's really wrong with the system.
Well, it's great to see you, Mark. I think it hit me at a certain point. I went as far as you can go in academic medicine. All the regalia, all the societies and honors and promotion and tenure. And it hits you at a certain point. I don't know if it's after I wrote 200 scientific articles or 250, but you realize no one's reading these things.
Yeah.
The system is so broke. And the problem is we have a lot of smart people in a system where they're just collecting their paycheck every 2 weeks, putting their head down. This shouldn't be, this isn't right. And we feel like we're cogs in the wheel, and people are afraid to get off the hamster wheel, take risks, and call things out. So in the book, The Price We Pay, my research team brought attention to this issue of price gouging and predatory billing, which is the term we called these kind of crazy bills that get thrown at people. They want a price, they're not given a price, and it ruins lives. And now we have this massive trust problem where some 62% of Americans say they have avoided care or delayed care for fear of the bill.
Yeah.
So you can have the cure for pancreas cancer now, but if 62% of the population, it doesn't trust you, that pill's only 38% effective, not 100% effective.
No, it's true. I mean, I literally had this direct experience. I had a knee issue, so I needed an MRI, and I went to Chinatown, New York City. I got one for $400. Had to get one in Berkshires, and where I live in the Massachusetts, and it was $2,500 for the same MRI, same machine. I just went and had back surgery and had hyperbaric oxygen. I went to this hospital and I said I wanted to get it. They said, okay, but it's $5,000 a session. I'm like, geez. And I talked to the head of it, and he goes, well, if you do it this way, not through Medicare, and you do it through an off-label use, it's $175. So we're talking 175, 5,000, exactly the same procedure. How does that happen in medicine?
Yes, exactly. Right. So this is the game. I call it the game in the book, The Price We Pay. And we found that the game is designed to maximize profits. It's not designed to be honest with patients. And so the book actually led to some real legislation and an executive order from the White House that was entirely bipartisan that now requires hospitals to start posting cash prices for common shoppable services. And the secret insurance discount that the insurance companies have with hospitals will all be public. All of that is going to start to happen this year. And that is because we felt firmly like we got to do something. All the doctors lobbying organizations out there are just fighting for more money for doctors. And that's the Common Trade Association thing.
Yeah.
That's not bad. I'm not saying that, we're not getting cut on Medicare, but the healthcare system is more than just fighting for more money for your own special interest.
And yet the average consumer is kind of just, at the effect of all this and has no power, and the costs are escalating. And, we spend so much money in healthcare and we're getting less and less, and the outcomes are worse and worse, and we don't have aligned incentives. And so It's kind of messed up. You know, I think you also talk about in your book Blind Spots some really interesting things that we've screwed up in medicine, or things that we're not looking at. And you know, when I remember I gave a lecture at Cleveland Clinic once, and it was a whole audience of, you know, doctors and scientists, and it sort of gave some case presentations, and I presented a case around autism that I treated, where we really helped to reverse the case using very sort of aggressive lifestyle dietary changes, fixing the microbiome, which is an issue for 98% of these kids have really screwed up guts. And he says, well, you know, this is just an anecdote, and, you know, where's the evidence? And I'm like, I said, look, you know, can you help me explain how the microbiome affects almost all known health conditions, from heart disease to cancer, to diabetes, to dementia, to autism, to allergies, to autoimmunity, to depression, to eczema, to asthma, to fibromyalgia, to chronic. I mean, I literally could go on forever, right? How can you explain that with your current set of facts and theories? Like, well, it can't. Like, so when you have a set of facts that present themselves to you, when the science changes, you have to change your thinking and your practice. Yet we don't do that. It's just so evident to me that despite knowing now that so many of our diseases are diet related, or that so many are related to the microbiome, which is controlled by our diet, or that so many diseases are related to environmental toxins, doctors don't learn about this. They don't put it in their practice. And it's sort of this kind of blind spot. Can you kind of talk about how you came up with this idea of blind spots and why the microbiome is such a blind spot? And we'll get into some more of them.
You know, maybe we need to be treating more diabetes with cooking classes instead of just throwing insulin at people. We are the most over-medicated generation in the history of the world, right? And so we can keep treating high blood pressure with first line after second line, or we can start talking about sleep quality and stress management. And this is the new movement now in medicine. It's a real tension to address these giant blind spots. The microbiome is one of them. Food is medicine, general body inflammation, all the stuff that you've been teaching the public and the medical community about for a long time now. The microbiome may be this central organ to health, but it has no center at the NIH. There's a little tiny unit, and I talked to the person who runs it, and they're massively underfunded.
Right.
But the microbiome trains the immune system, digests food, produces vitamins. It's involved in mood because some of the bacteria produce serotonin. It even regulates estrogen. It deconjugates estrogen into an active form. And
now
so
you're sounding like a functional medicine doc there, Marty.
I think at heart I want to be one, but you know, I don't have the expertise on which foods and vitamins. Right. But what I'm interested in as almost a journalist within the medical profession is we have new exciting research that relates to every disease process, every specialty, and it gets almost no attention.
Yeah.
And this one study by the Mayo Clinic, I think maybe the most significant study of the last 10 years, in my opinion, that got almost no attention.
Yeah.
They looked at 14,000 kids and compared kids who got antibiotics in the first couple of years of life compared to kids who did not.
Yes.
And the kids who got antibiotics in the first few years of life went on to have higher rates of chronic diseases. They had a 20% higher rate of obesity, a 21% higher rate of learning disabilities, a 32% higher rate of attention deficit disorder. All these things are on the rise. 90% higher rate of asthma. Almost
under Dr. Fauci's tenure, things like, well, chronic health conditions for children, especially, which is what people should be more concerned about, have increased, and there is correlation with the therapeutics, the inoculations that are being given to children, and that connection, and also with, you know, I'm still on YouTube, but a possible connection with inoculations and SIDS and SADS.
Almost a 300% increase in celiac disease.
Yeah.
All these diseases are going up. We're messing up the microbiome. That was the mechanism believed to how the antibiotics worked to induce the increased risk of these diseases. And how can you look at that and say, yeah, no, let's ignore that. There's nothing there. We may have...
Because there's no pill, Marty, to fix it.
There's no
statin for the microbiome.
No pharma company CEO gets rich. But it's amazing now. The research on the microbiome is blowing me away. And they published this study in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, which is in our world of research, is a little bit of a flag that no one else would take it.
Right.
I think it's probably the most important, significant study in the last 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Tell us about it.
So, I mean, the fact that you have all these chronic diseases, I mean, all the stuff that is increasing, attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, we scratch our heads. People come in and
asthma,
we diagnose them with celiac and they say, Doc, how could this possibly happen? And we come up with some non-answer like, well, it's unknown or, genetic. And no, there's a study here telling us 300% increased risk when you alter the microbiome with antibiotics early in life.
Yep.
And it's other things, it's C-sections, it's ultra-processed foods, it's high refined carbohydrates. So we have yet to really understand what's going on here. The rise in colon cancer in young, healthy people.
Yeah, right.
Turns out that there's an association with the microbiome. There's an association with polyps and antibiotic use. There's an association with C-section delivery, being born by C-section and going on to have colon cancer before age 50 was an association just published in JAMA Surgery. So you have this incredible body of literature emerging on this central organ system that is highly actionable, that we can talk about, that we can study. And it kind of lives in this corner because what specialty is it? And what NIH center is it? Is it infectious diseases, GI? Is it oncology? Is it primary care? Is it functional medicine? And it has no home because we've created these silos, right?
Well, that's really the fundamental issue with medicine, right? Is the subspecialization, the specialization, the dividing the body into parts and geography and specialization based on that, but it has no scientific rationale. Like when you actually look at how the body is truly organized, it's one integrated ecosystem.
Yes.
And it's not a bunch of separate different parts that have no relation to one another. They're all doing.
It's so connected. It's so connected.
Yeah, and
right?
it's really connected. And the microbiome is I would say the best example of that. And in the functional medicine world, it's always been the place we start. When anybody comes in with almost anything, we get optimize their nutrition and we fix their gut. Now, when I say fix the gut, most traditional doctors go, well, I don't know what you mean. Like take a laxative if you're constipated, take Imodium if you have diarrhea, if you have a parasite, take a drug. Like people don't know in the medical world how to optimize the microbiome. That's why it's ignored.
Yes.
It's not taught. People don't understand how to regulate it, and it's possible and it's doable. And that's what we do every day in functional medicine.
It's inherited, the microbiome. So you pass on the skeleton of the microbiome to offspring. Antibiotics and C-sections save lives. We've both seen that.
Yeah.
But they're massively overused and they're messing up the microbiome in ways we don't even appreciate.
Yeah.
And people are being given options without really knowing what is potentially happening because of this. Now, I don't know what causes autism. Other smarter people may have ideas. But the researchers that did this study, and they're not no-name researchers, talking to Marty Blazer, who I think is the world expert on the microbiome.
Missing
Microbes, great book. He told me that while they did not find an association with altering the microbiome and autism, they believe there is an association there. They think maybe they haven't sampled enough children or something. Now, I don't know if he's right, but if he's right, that is a massive signal in the data that we should be following.
Well, no, it's true. I mean, it's not surprising. When you look at the data on autism, almost all the kids have some kind of gut issue. They have bloating, they have distension, they have sticky, smelly poops.
Really? I did not know
that.
that.
It's really common. I mean, it's really out there and it's in the literature. And I can tell you, if you talk to parents with kids with autism, they all have gut issues. And it's not a sort of a red herring finding. It's a core finding. And about 75% have altered immune systems and inflammation. And if you look at the brain of kids with autism, they're bigger on MRI. This is work done by Martha Herbert at Harvard. And there's also, if you look at kids who've died from accident or something who had autism, their brains are all full of inflammation. Their microglia, which is the immune system of the brain, are all just on fire. And when you look at the history, and I've treated many, many, many dozens of kids with autism over the years, the stories are almost sort of universally similar. The kids, have born by C-section. They're not breastfed. They get lots of colic. They get antibiotics. They got eczema. They get earaches. Then they get piled on with tons of vaccines. Not saying vaccines cause autism, but it's just a lot for these kids' immune systems. And then something flips.
I'm chuckling a little bit. I mean, I love what you're saying, but I'm chuckling because I had this kid come in, a teenager who had the classic sort of irritable bowel, chronic abdominal pain. No one knows what it is, has had a million tests done. It doesn't show anything definitive. And I decided to take a lot of time, something we're not incentivized to do. Take a lot of time.
I mean, you took more than 8 minutes with the patient,
more than 8
Marty?
minutes. I listened to the patient. I didn't look at the EHR. And it turns out that the kid had that same profile. Born by C-section, constant antibiotics, unnecessarily, it sounded like, throughout their early childhood, especially in the first 3 years when the microbiome is being formed, and had eaten terrible food their whole life. And then the mom tells me this condition, which we just give this diagnosis of irritable bowel. How could this possibly happen to my son? Well, I wasn't there when you got all these choices, but you've also been feeding the kid shit for the last 12 years. And so we're shocked. And then we have this massive whack-a-mole medical industrial system that's going to order millions of tests and put the kid on some kind of IVIG or some kind of Keytruda.
Yeah.
It's can we talk about root causes?
Root cause, exactly. And the antibiotics are so prevalent. I mean, I gave a lecture to about 500 people on Aspen Institute last week. And I asked, talking about something I think similar to this, I said, how many of you in the audience have never had antibiotics? And not a single person raised their hand, right? So, and if you look at, for example, there's work done on Bifidobacterium infantis, which is a really important keystone species that proliferates in an infant. It's supposed to be there, but if the mother's taking antibiotics, it's very sensitive. It will get wiped out. And this is important for the development of immune tolerance, for the prevention of allergy, autoimmunity, eczema, inflammation, asthma, all these conditions. And there's actually a company that's been funded, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars called it. I think it's the name of the company, but the product is Vivo, EVIVO. And it's basically a baby probiotic that you can give to the baby. And the thing that's unique about it is that it colonizes. Because when you take any probiotics as an adult, they don't really stay. Yeah. They kind of go through. They have an impact, but it's like tourists going through an economy. This is actually building a house. And it's quite amazing how it prevents a lot of these conditions. So
that's what we need research on.
There's a lot. The thing is that there's a lot. Like if people say, we won't practice evidence-based medicine. I'm like, have you looked at the evidence? There's like 10 million articles on PubMed. Have you actually read all of them, and you actually know what you're talking about? Because this sort of veil of evidence-based medicine often is a sort of a smokescreen for people not knowing all the data and saying it just because they don't know it means it's not true. And I think that's unfortunate because like you said, when you start to look at the research on the microbiome, you found so much.
I saw a trial in China where they're treating autism with combination of bacterial therapy, or basically probiotics.
Fecal transplants
and Shepherd Pratt, affiliated with my hospital, Johns Hopkins, is doing a trial with probiotics and bipolar.
I did want to say, yes, he is Johns Hopkins, affiliated with Johns Hopkins University. There's the disinformation psyops propaganda section of Johns Hopkins University, and that is where a tabletop pandemic exercise 201 took place. Training exercises just months leading up to what I call the pandemic. And that was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others, but this was ran out of Johns Hopkins University. So was Clade X. And then you've got Cambridge for the UK side. That's similar things with the psyops, disinformation, psychological, I don't know what you would call it. Anyway, psyops, psychological operations. And again, the propaganda. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because there are people at Johns Hopkins University that are pushing narratives that are incorrect, that are causing possible harm and death. It doesn't mean that he is. There are people that go to that education system, and they're on the right side of humanity.
To treat bipolar.
Like him, I think.
So it's this is, how much have we spent on cancer, and what have we gotten for it? Almost nothing.
Yeah.
The ROI is almost zero. I mean, the top paper at ASCO, the cancer meeting, was like, oh, if we use Avastin for GBM of the brain, you can get another
Couple of
year,
months.
couple of months, no added cure, right? So
Right,
anyway, I love what you're saying, 100%.
So I want to go into like a kind of related but a little bit of a touchy subject, which is the subject of vaccines. And it's one of those subjects that is so confusing to me as a doctor, as a scientist, because science is about asking questions.
You can't ask questions about
And
vaccines.
it's about having a hypothesis and proving it negative, right? That's kind of the basic scientific method. And if you question anything at all about any vaccine, you're immediately able to be an anti-vaxxer. And you can't say, well, is this vaccine safe? Is that vaccine safe? What are the risks and benefits of each one individually? What about them combined? And it's just the weirdest thing. It's like heresy. And I experienced this personally, like at Cleveland Clinic when I was there. Somehow, because people thought I was anti-vaxxer, the pediatric department like got very upset.
You get that label,
and
it's over.
and I literally had to write a letter like, no, I'm not. I've been vaccinated. My kids are vaccinated, but it's important to actually ask questions about this, because if there's signal somewhere that there's an issue, we should look at it. And you wrote a very courageous paper that was published, that you co-authored it was published in Journal of Medical Ethics. And it was talking about whether or not we should be giving vaccine boosters to young adults going back to school. And you basically said that in a survey of all the data, and I'll let you unpack it, but the punchline was that the risk of getting it was worse than the risk of not getting it. And I wonder, one, can you tell us about that study? And two, what has been the reaction? And have you been now labeled an anti-vaxxer?
Yeah, sure. I've gotten that label a little bit for questioning the booster vaccine in young, healthy people, especially who have already had COVID. So the question is, with the vaccine booster in young, healthy people, is there a benefit? And there was so much controversy, and I saw how at the FDA it was pushed in with the political might of, a top-down order, that it made me ask some questions. The two top vaccine experts at the FDA were directly fired by their superior for questioning the COVID vaccine approval for young, healthy people. That is the booster, booster, not the original. So the CDC never released the data, and only the data we had was observational. The clinical trial data on the booster, it was basically just reamed through. They didn't go through the normal process. So then when you look at the risk of myocarditis, not to mention the other claims that are out there of people being messed up or injured or not the same after the vaccine, again, high-risk people early in the pandemic, it was very clear the benefits outweigh the risks. But when you get down...
I don't agree with that. So this is his Johns Hopkins University disinformation coming out. Anyway, so yeah, some of what he was talking about regarding like the other health stuff, focusing on diet and nutrition, and then talking about C-sections and the microbiome, like that's all very interesting stuff. But he and I are most definitely not on the same page when it comes to the COVID-19 therapeutics. So
medications save lives.
I'm going to try to give him some saving grace here and see if he talks about anything else.
I've seen that. That's part of the medicine we're trained in. But we're going to convert America's children into a generation of patients. Maybe we need to talk more about school lunch programs than putting every kid on Ozempic. And that is not a conversation that we're having. We're just sort of celebrating, hey, high five, we found a way to, create a GLP-1 agonist. We'll see about these new generation GLP-1 drugs that have a blocker on the muscle receptor, supposedly. They're going to enter clinical trials soon.
Yeah.
But
so to prevent the muscle loss,
to prevent it or reduce it. Maybe. I mean, I believe in
that. Like you can supplement like with proper hormone replacement therapies with human growth hormone, and so again, like yet again, people are trying to prescribe medications that have long-term side effects and short-term side effects, and yeah, it's an industry. I'm going to keep on going because not like either.
We would be showing phenomenal outcomes if we did the right kind of research, right? So how do we deal with this?
I do think everyone that goes into medicine is going in it for amazing reasons. And one thing that unites everybody in medicine is everyone has a sense of compassion that drew us into this calling. So we've got good people, but we walk into a bad system, and it's not a system we designed. It's a system we inherited, but we shouldn't defend it. It's entirely broken. We have a bloated NIH that funds research worse than the government funds the Postal Service. We have silos.
That's pretty bad.
There's a small group of people making all the decisions at the very top. These are folks where we need term limits, the folks where they decide what's important or not important, and it's based on their understanding of the world. Medical school education at every school in the United States is controlled by 19 people that serve on the board of a private company that determines the curriculum of every medical school in the country. And if you want to do something creative, talk about food or inflammation, you got to get back in line.
Is this the company that creates the licensing exam, or is this
AAMC? They run, the USMLE.
Yeah.
And so these, I've talked to deans of medical schools that have said, Marty, I'd love to talk about this stuff. All this stuff you talk about, all these stuff that are in the blind spots of modern medicine. And they say, we can't, because the students know exactly what their learning objectives are for the boards.
Yeah.
And if we teach something else, they're going to skip that class and they're going to focus on memorizing and regurgitating the 55 enzyme names they have to spit out on an exam. Why are we forcing our youngest, brightest, creative, most altruistic minds to regurgitate the names of enzymes that you can look up on a smartphone?
Right.
And so we have this system now where a small group of people are controlling medical education. A small group of people control where the NIH dollars go, and who are funding the big questions central to health. For example, there's a new practice that's taking off of cutting the tongue under infants.
Frenulum,
the frenulum under the tongue. Sometimes they'll even do the side of the tongue or the frenulum under the inside of the upper lip. It's crazy to me. I have ENT docs that say there's a subset of kids that may benefit.
Well,
from
if you're tongue tied, like fully tongue tied.
If it's truly a foreshortened tongue, they believe there could be a benefit. It's never been proven, but they do believe there's clinical benefit.
Wonderful man, really kind, good-hearted man, brilliant guy, who was the director of the NIH. And I said to him, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, I said, France, why didn't you use COVID to educate the American public about the importance of nutrition in optimizing your health to prevent COVID? Because 63% of the hospitalizations and deaths from COVID were because of poor diet.
Yeah.
And we know that we are 4% of the population in the world and 16% of the cases in deaths. He's like, oh, well, we couldn't do that because it would basically blame the victim, and we don't want to do that. And in another meeting, I was like, no, it's not their fault. It's because we have a toxic food system.
Right.
Talk about that and then at another meeting, he got up and said, well, we don't really know that much about nutrition, and there's no National Institute of Nutrition at the NIH, and many other countries have this. And nutrition is the biggest cause of all the diseases we see today, period. No argument. All the science says this.
Yes.
And he got up and said, we don't really know much, and there's not much data.
Yeah, he doesn't really know much. There's not much data.
The same meeting, Dr. Darius Mazafarian was there, who's was the dean of the Tufts School of Nutrition Science and Policy, is now the head of the Food as Medicine Institute there. He said, well, Francis, Dr. Collins, I beg to differ with you. And then he went into this long kind of scientific unpacking of the literature that we do know.
You should tell.
I was like, wow, it's not necessarily malevolence. Sometimes it's just ignorance.
Never.
But I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I also, in terms of the medical school stuff, you're right about the licensing exam. And I think it's one of the things we're working on in Washington, my nonprofit called the Food Fix Campaign, is to change the licensing exams, because that's what determines the curriculum. And my daughter's in med school now, and I'm like, have you learned about this? No. Have you learned about the microbiome? No. Have you learned about inflammation? No. It's like all the things that matter, she's not learning about. And she says, all I know is, Dad, I have to pass the test, and I just have to study what's up for the test.
Yes,
and that's it.
Right.
And I have the practice test, and I have the questions, and I have, and it's like, if there was 5% of the questions on nutrition and chronic disease, that would force the change in the curriculum. If there was 5% of the questions on the microbiome or on inflammation and health, or on like any of these things, on mitochondrial function and how to treat mitochondria, that's another black hole, right?
Yes.
I don't know, blind spot. I don't know if you talk about.
It's a big blind spot. Energy and mitochondria.
Okay, let's keep on going.
Just a press release, and it's a CDC recommendation.
Yeah.
So
they got a full page ad in the New York Times.
Yes. So this is the type of trial level transparency we need.
Yeah.
and we got to do it now, because otherwise we need better funding in academics. We need more civil discourse in medicine. We need less cancel culture.
Yeah.
And so,
it's so true. It's so true. Just like we totally agree on everything here. One of the things that shocked me that I found out, because as a doctor, you think, okay, well, the literature is published. They're publishing all the data on a particular drug or particular intervention that they're studying. And it turns out that pharma has to present all their data to the FDA, but they don't have to publish all the data. And typically they only publish the positive data. They don't publish any of the negative trial data.
That's right.
And so the public has no clue that there's all these other studies that contradict the one study that showed that it was positive. And the FDA is a captured agency, because it's like a revolving door for pharma and pharma leadership. And so, like, it was sort of shocking to me as even as a doctor, that I found this out. I'm like, what do you mean they don't publish all the data? Like, they just hide all the negative data.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how it is. So for people listening, it's you've got to be smart on your own, and you've got to be your own advocate, and you've got to be proactive about your health, and you've got to not just take things at face value, and you got to.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to switch over from that just because it's just fairly redundant. I apologize for the lighting on the video for me, but anyway, just before I stop the video, I just wanted to share a little bit of this Sam Tripoli American Memory Hole with Donald Jeffries. I'm not going to play the whole thing, obviously, but it's just it may be interesting.
This is only
Dudes, Jay Nice, Juicy Johnny, Johnny Woodard, live from the $20 a month weekend Skank Fest at the end. Yeah, let's get it. Promote disinformation. Very excited to have him back. I think this is like 4th or 5th time on the show. Always a pleasure to talk to the legend. Please welcome back to Tinfoil Hat, Don Jeffries. How are you, Don?
Oh, Sam, it's always fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Don, thanks for being here. Greatly appreciated. For those who may not be familiar with your last appearance, can you tell us again a little bit about yourself and where our listeners can find you?
Well, I speak to people, and they'll promote them as the alternative. But it's you can do searches for me and find me everywhere. I think last time I was here, we were discussing Masking the Truth, my COVID book, and that was, I call it the most shadow banned book in the world, because they just, Barnes and Noble just disappeared the book. It was there and then it's gone. There's no explanation. Twitter got rid. Amazon got rid of the Kindle version. No explanation. Apple Books wanted to charge $999 for it. I mean, they run by the
ridiculous comments from trolls. Oh, Graham, that is doing better than my own personal.
You're going up against somebody, in a sporting event, and the referees are just going to blow the whistle on you every time you score or something. I mean, that's what they're doing to us. It's not a level playing field.
Yeah, I see that in stand-up comedy too. Like, there's friends of mine who I love, and they're great comics, but the love they're allowed to, the way they're allowed to promote and grow their brand versus what I can do it's just really demoralizing, to be honest with you. It's really sad. And if there were, like, this is the worst part. If there was a rule for everybody, I would respect it, but there's not. So there was a group of guys, three guys on a couch, and they didn't like one of my jokes. They broke it down, and their content is so mid and milquetoast and hot garbage. Okay. But they get hundreds of thousands of views because they lean to the progressive left and they're allowed to thrive. Whereas me, I get, and it's so funny because you bring up, like, the AI knows that something's political or just a cat video or something like that, right? So when I put out one of any of my clips from any of my stand-up, my comedy, or excuse me, my podcast, I mean, it gets no traction, like none.
Yeah.
No.
But if somebody takes my account, takes my video, puts it on their account, it blows up.
And what's funny is they still try to censor like the bad words, all the trigger words, and for some reason it still gets Sam. Like you'll censor the F-bomb, you'll censor the world of Israel, and it still somehow ends up getting shadow banned one way or another. And then, like, yes, he says, I'll post it on the Tinfoil Hat account, and that shit will get way more views than his actual.
No, but
account.
even if you compare, let's say, a female comic to a male comic, what they allow female comics to say in their clips is way beyond what they'll allow, especially a white guy, to say in their clip.
Oh,
It's
well, like the other day, Martin Moreno posted a little thirst trap, like with his t-shirt off, trying to be like kind of provocative on Instagram. Got shadow banned, got kicked off. When Instagram's full of girls twerking all day in bikinis, that makes no sense why he's considered like a sex object when it was just a dude kind of being, I guess, what's sexy. I didn't like it, but it's like, why is he getting kicked off of Instagram for that?
Yeah, they don't have any, and that's what happens when you get in the censorship games. You know, there's no rhyme or reason to. There's inconsistencies everywhere, and that's why, you know, obviously there should be no censorship. You know, it's problem solved. You know, I'm a free speech purist. There aren't many of us left. You know, and I told the story. You know, people in my book Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776, 1963. I learned, you know, I have our friend Chris Graves does a lot of research for me, and Peter Seacosh. They really helped a lot on this book, but they started helping me back then. And I learned when I was researching that, just looking up Woodrow Wilson's locking up World War I protesters in prison. You know, they naturally objected to that, petitioned the Supreme Court. Oliver Wendell Holmes, great liberal judge, eugenicist, you know, warmonger, like most of those guys were. Wilson can do this. And he uses his rationale. He's the one who invented the "you can't yell fire in a crowded theater." And that, you know, this was in World War I. Nobody heard of that before. And so that's where that asterisk on the First Amendment came from. And the American people, they just collectively shrugged their shoulders. They didn't think, wait a minute, you know, how is objecting to protesting a war? How is that yelling fire in a crowded theater? What are you using a ridiculous analogy like that for? That's where that comes from. The average American has no concept of that. And once you allow that asterisk to people on the First Amendment, then it paved the way later for hate speech and misinformation and disinformation.
Yes.
All the stuff we have now. And we allow it. Instead, people need to be purists. Don't say I'm not racist or I'm not. You have a right to be racist. It's not illegal. Maybe stupid, but it's not illegal. You have a right to be misogynist. You have a right to be bigoted. You have a right to be wrong. You can be misinformed. Hell, a vast majority of the American people is misinformed about everything. So if you're going to legalize that, you're going to have to throw everyone in prison. But nobody looks at it that like. Instead, they say, well, no, that's not hate speech. Hate speech is thought crime. That's what that means. It's an Orwellian term designed because we're all thought criminals. That's what it is. You know, we're projecting thoughts that we're not supposed to do.
So the left is getting all upset because they want to ban books in children's libraries, okay? In children's libraries, pornography books.
Genderqueer, yeah.
Which, when I was growing up, there was kind of this understanding that you don't sexualize children. It's just wrong. You let them grow. And, you know, you have all these people now, they go to therapy for childhood trauma, but because they're on the progressive left, you know, and the progressive left's whole thing is smile while you do evil shit, right? They have no problem with inflicting trauma on the next generation. Because again, the theory of hate is more devastating than real life on the ground, you know, on the streets problems like crime, you know, sexualization of children, all these things that have giant ramifications in their society. So they're losing their mind about banning sexualized books in schools, in libraries for children, not adults, for children. Okay. But yet they have no problem with the censorship of people who have opposite political views of them.
That's right.
They have none, which is, again, in a way, a thought book burning. You're burning a thought. You're not allowing it to be heard. And it's the exact same thing. And it just gets to this thing where you just allow when you allow something to be done against something that you don't like, simply because you don't like it, it will be used against you eventually.
That's right. You can't give them any leeway. You can't give them an inch, because what happens is this is a slippery slope. And once the so-called right, the opposition, and it's, I started out on the left. When I was a teenager in the mid 1970s, I was working for Mark Lane, the most prominent critic of the Warren Report, for the Citizens Committee of Inquiry as a volunteer. I was, emulating him. I was being a civil libertarian. I was the ACLU card-carrying member, because the ACLU back then cared about civil liberties. I was on as far on the left as you could get. The left today is a joke. The left today, back then, they used to want to extend rights to people who didn't have them. They wanted, and they're the ones that were against censorship. Now, back then, you had George Carlin and people like that it was about, saying dirty words or sexual stuff, and I was right there with them. Yeah, we can't censor this. But now you have the left is for all, and back then it was a Catholic League of Decency and so forth is going against, that was promoting censorship. Now you have the exact thing is flipped completely 180 degrees, where you have the left. Their entire game now is to get people in trouble for saying something. They want to cancel you. They want to get you fired. Oh, what did you say? Did you hear what they said? Did you hear what Sam Tripoli said on his? Their entire thing is to try to catch you and say, hey, what did you hear what he said? What is he? That's racist. That's misogynist. That's anti-Semitic. Whatever. And that's their entire. And they were so different back then. They were the ones. That's why I was attracted to them. And the right is, they were the ones that, kind of the authoritarians. Now the left is so authoritarian. So you have the New York Times and things like that running articles now about the concept that the Bill of Rights goes too far. You have a recent poll that says 53% of Americans think the First Amendment goes too far. So we're outnumbered. Their propaganda has succeeded. Wow. The majority of Americans don't like free speech. They don't want it.
Yeah, and it's so crazy to me. It's so crazy to me because they just again, it's like this war being waged by rich kids on middle America. Yeah. And it's just a bunch of rich kids playing commies who have everything in the world, and they just want to destroy their parents' America. That's what they want, which is we're this weird thing, Donald, where we're kind of have this like weird hybrid between the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the Russian Bolshevik Revolution, where we have the Cultural Revolution of China, where all the rich kids, all the children went after the adults and told them they had bad think. And then you have these foreign invaders. Then in the Bolsheviks, they all pretended that they were Russians. Here, they're not even pretending, but they're all just coming in through these forest borders, and we're seeing chaos go. Now, this weird thing that's happening in these apartment complexes, we're hearing different stories now, boots on the ground. It's not what we're being told about, the gangs. It's about a shitty ass landlord that wouldn't clean up and stuff. But this fits into this kind of like sorcery of manipulation to manifest a kind of immigration war that they kind of want going on, because at the end of the day, they really do want martial law. What's your thoughts on all that?
Some type of war. Did you see that the Hells Angels were on the way there?
Yeah, that's not true at all.
Yeah, no, it's not. It was a lot of more misinformation. The picture was like from a long time ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because how far have we sunk? We got to depend on the Hells Angels,
the Rolling Stones tried to do that. That blew up.
That didn't work that time. But I mean, this is the immigration problem. Is that again? It goes back at least to the 80s, and in American Memory Hall, I talk a little bit more about Reagan's legacy, because the right loves Reagan. And I'm trying to show them again. There's no reason to love this guy. He had a chance to do something about the problem in 1986, and instead he got, they say, oh, the Democrats fooled him. The Democrats are always fooling these stupid party people. They fooled Trump. I don't know why. It's why they call it the stupid party, but they fooled Reagan somehow. And so he signed a terrible law that granted amnesty to millions. And I remember I was working with a lot of immigrants back then as a blue collar worker, and they were all saying how stupid it was. They're all going to be brave. They're going to bring all their family members in, and they did. And nobody blames for that. And at that time, you could have done something about it. And then you had Prop, what I just wrote, Prop 187, which was passed in a very different California in 1994, overwhelmingly passed, which would have done the most logical thing. You don't need a deportation staff. You just say, hey, if you're not here legally, you can't get government benefits. That's for people that are here legally. That's a very simple thing to do. We can't seem to do it, but the citizens want to do it. But what happens, and this goes into what I talk about in American Memory, judicial review, all the way back to the beginning of the country, because nobody listened to Thomas Jefferson at the beginning, and they let the judiciary usurp the other two branches and allow them to interpret the Constitution, which they never intended. Jefferson said, no, this is not what we wanted. I think I'm the first one since Jefferson to talk about this. But California, 1994, passes a very important proposition, would have solved the problem in their state at least. And the federal judge takes it and says, no, unconstitutional. So again, they overturn the will of the people. And they've done that on marijuana measures and things like that too. That's not what a constitutional republic or democracy does, where you let some ridiculous unelected judge overturn the will of the people. But this is where we are. And so you come to the point where we are now, where you have a problem that I don't know that you can solve it at this time. I mean, it's the gates have been the flood. And so the thing where the migrants are overtaking the apartment buildings, I don't know. I've heard several stories about it, and you hear like law enforcement's not doing anything about it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense unless you want everything to collapse. And that seems to be what they want to happen. We'll let it go. Just like we saw during Black Lives Matters and Antifa in 2020, let everything burn. I mean, what? Wait, I mean, what kind of, that's why I have no argument with the anarchists anymore. I have a lot of anarchist supporters, and I used to argue with them a little bit, but I have no argument with them anymore. What authority is there worth respecting? There's nothing worth respecting at all anymore. So as far as I'm concerned, anarchy would not be any worse than what we have.
I agree, man. Guys, we're going to tell you about our friends at Wise Wolf Gold and Silver. That's right. Wise Wolf Gold metals have been. And if you think you can't afford precious metals, think again. Above, pressure from below, in order to have us beg for martial law, which will be basically throwing out of our Constitution and a whole new system being thrown in. And once they seize power, they never give it back, ever. I'm pretty sure that California still has COVID protocols in place, which supersede any kind of rights we have. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. And then you just start seeing the slow implementation of these kind of like political activist judges in positions to allow things to pass that shouldn't be passed. And once you set a standard or a precedence, now you're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
They basically, he was the designated loser. They really are. A totalitarian, bloodthirsty tyrant like that to be. But hey, she's welcome in our government. I don't know. Maybe Hitler's great cabin the park. They ended up with an ice pick in his head later. But I mean, these people don't know it. They think that, and it was not an uprising. I mean, there were so few Germans. The leader Trotsky, the Russian leader, his real name was Lev Bronstein. He was from the Bronx, New York. They ended up with an ice pick in his head later. But I mean, these are the people that I think it's is it Lenin or Stalin's? I think it's Stalin's granddaughter or something. Is still alive today, and I have it in the book and I'd forgotten it. But she's some kind of an official somewhere, and she's as messed up as you would expect a granddaughter of a totalitarian, bloodthirsty tyrant like that to be. But hey, she's welcome in our government. I don't know. Maybe Hitler's great granddaughter would be welcome if she was around. I don't know. But this is these guys are all connected. They really are. You got it exactly right, Sam, when you said these people. And Hitler was whisked away to Argentina after the war. That's all the evidence shows that, and they know that. And they basically, he was the designated loser. He was supposed to be the guy and that lost, and he played his role well. And I don't know why, because I do talk freely about Jews, but I think I'm pretty fair about it. But a lot of the people that support me, they're just obsessed with Jews. So I got a lot of Hitler fans. I mean, I got a lot of Hitler fans.
I can't stand these guys.
They love Hitler. So I kind of joke around with them and try to say, "Oh, that's your boy," and everything.
That's
and
your boy. It's your boy Hitler.
That's your boy Hitler. But But the problem is we've been lied to. But that's why I try to say I don't try to evaluate any of these foreign leaders at all, because I don't think it's possible, because we have to look at it through the lens of our intelligence agencies, our dishonest state-controlled press, our court historians, which are the people I'm criticizing in this book, because the average court historian, they wouldn't pay any attention to me, because they would, and they can't answer everything I have is documented. So they would just ridicule me if they paid attention to me at all. But they're wrong on everything. But this is what they're propping up, this false narrative. It's kind of an overall narrative. And that's why even with the American people as dumbed down as they are, I think that's why they related so much to Trump's fake news thing, because it's kind of a blanket condemnation, because everybody knows they're being lied to. So when you talk about Hitler or the Holocaust or down to Fidel Castro and Saddam Hussein, any of these boogeymen, I don't know what to believe. I'm not trusting anything they say. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that any of those guys were good, because I think they're all together in on it. But my books, what I show is, look, I don't have to like the Confederates or the Nazis, but that to show you what the good guys did. And that's my point. Is we committed atrocities, and the subtext of this book is all the terrible things we did. I mean, I couldn't believe the foreign adventurism we had under Wilson. I think he invaded Mexico like 8 times.
What?
Back then? Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you had. I talk about what they did. It's the same kind of atrocity. The Philippines, they did horrible. Haiti, in Haiti, they invaded Haiti, and FDR, the great liberal who was an actual racist. Most of these guys weren't racist, but FDR definitely was. And FDR, him and his buddy, his cousin, they had a plan in Haiti, because he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy then. Chicken hawk, a World War I, cheerleader, but of course he wasn't going to, just like Lindsey Graham, he wasn't going to anywhere near war. But they get there, and their plan is they want to build and run a plantation in Haiti, an all-black country. This was his fantasy. He had like a plantation fantasy, a fetish, and he, they never got to do it. But and then his cousin made some kind of ridiculous comment about one of the leaders of Haiti, and how he's basically Jimmy the Greek type thing about his high thighs and how he must have been bred that. I mean, just ridiculous. And FDR liked the comment so much, he was still sharing it with people at toasts and informal gatherings a couple decades later. So this is the stuff people don't know. We had a foreign adventurism and meddlesome policy even back then in the 1910s and 1920s. And it just, you can just look at a graph and you can see why we are where we are now, because that stuff happened and most of it wasn't even reported. It takes deep research to even find that this stuff was even going on. And not to mention the things that we were doing in these places, because if you look at, it's the same kind of things that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. They weren't playing soccer with decapitated heads like our troops did in, Iraq and Afghanistan, but it was the same kind of stuff. Yeah, they're targeting civilians, raping constantly, and they had a huge grift going on in terms of stealing. And again, that goes back to General Sherman in the Civil War, where they had, I published that in Crimes and Cover-Ups, when I published a letter from a Union soldier, a guy named Lieutenant Myers. Best evidence you could get. Court historians would ignore it, but he's bragging about how much jewelry and property they've stolen on their march to the sea. And but he's complaining because he's saying, General Sherman, he has to take a cut of everything. So he's got enough gold and silver to open up his own bank. So that's great evidence, because he doesn't have an axe to grind. He's just kind of bitching about why does he have to take a cut of it, but he's fine with them stealing everything. But that established a precedent. It goes all the way to World War I, World War II. I talked in my book about how, they would send home skulls of Japanese to their family members, as a trophy, that kind of stuff. And the widespread theft has always been kind of an undercurrent with our troops. And that's why I say, I don't know. The other side was probably doing bad stuff too, but whatever they were doing, all I'm saying is we weren't if you're proud of doing that stuff, you're proud of targeting civilians and, raping kids, raping women, burning homes, destroying crops. That's the kind of stuff we've done. I'm sorry, I can't support those troops.
And Sherman
And,
also has some of the worst quotes you'll ever see about black people. The black people in their trains that were behind them that were just looking for direction because, they were just liberated off of these plantations with nowhere to live, no resources at all. And he's got some of the worst quotes about just the kind of people they are. He describes them as like vermin, just parasites on his army as he's going through the countryside. Yeah, that guy had no love in his heart for. He was a pure soldier of fortune. Just there for his own glory.
In fact, when some of the blacks, some of them tried to follow him on his march, he had his troops burn the bridges so they couldn't follow them. So he was but again,
tricked them. He tricked like deceit. He used active deceit and then burned the bridges and trapped them there on the other side.
Yeah. So this is it's why again we just Americans that's why the subtitle of the book is how the court historians promote disinformation, and they do. And if Thomas Jefferson said at the time that the people that didn't read newspapers were better informed than the people that did, because there were so many lies. It's better to be uninformed than misinformed, I guess. That's the way it is. The people that don't read conventional history books know more about history than those that do, because they're just reading. I mean, just from they're still telling you Oswald killed JFK, 19 crazed Arabs with box cutters and plastic knives did 9/11. This is so. These are the same people. Why are you going to believe them about anything? You're lying about everything. You won't even allow John Wilkes Booth's family. I was in contact with John Wilkes Booth's great grand niece or something until she canceled me. I think probably over Trump or COVID. I don't know. But she was one of the people that I noticed, hey, God, I'm not friends with her anymore. But until then, I talked to her, but her family had been trying to get his body exhumed because there's a question that was the real John Wilkes Booth that died in Garrett's farm. Okay, well, usually when you exhume a body, it's the family that determines that. If they want to do it, sure, go ahead, go for it. Not in this case, because it could solve a historical mystery, and so the National Park Service blocks it. That's how committed they are to these lies. If that wasn't John Wilkes Booth's body, what would that mean today? Americans would just shrug. They probably know who the hell John Wilkes Booth is, and most Americans. So it wouldn't mean anything, but they're so committed to the lies. And I'll give you better than that. Meriwether Lewis, you go back to, you're talking about over 200 years ago, the Lewis and Clark expedition. His family, again, I talked to his great-great-great-great-grandnephew or something. They've been trying to get his body exhumed too. National Park Service blocking it because they believe he was murdered instead of killing himself. Now, if he was murdered, that would have no ramifications on the politics of today. But they're so
interesting.
Yeah.
Hey guys, real quick, I want to tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, and that's Helix Sleep. Okay, Helix Sleep mattresses are the best in the business. I go on the road all the time. I sleep on unlike us and easily. Helix mattress pick is offering 25% long. We look out in December at Side Splitters on the 6th. All right, let's get back to it. The Wilkes Booth thing. What is the theory behind that it could be a different body? What would the ramifications of that be?
Well, there's a guy named Finis L. Bates, who, by the way, is a direct ancestor of Kathy Bates, the actress.
Of course.
Bates, he wrote a book that talked about the escape and death of John Wilkes Booth, and they even had a mummy that toured the country for a while that was, claimed it was a John Wilkes Booth mummy. But the idea was that he escaped, and they used a double. I think it was Captain William Boyd or something. He was the one that was shot in the barn. And for whatever reason, they let Booth escape, and I don't really know why, but his physician originally, when he went and viewed the corpse on board the ship that he was on, said that body bears no resemblance to John Wilkes Booth. And eventually he came around and said that it was him, but lots of doubt about it. And again, it's an easy way to solve it. Just exhume the body. You can do DNA now. But the fact they won't do it, doesn't that feed the conspiracy theories? I mean, what are you supposed to believe? Why won't you? I mean, if you want to shut these crazy conspiracy theorists up, just go ahead and exhume the body. But for whatever reason, they like to explain things, and that's why I like to use that word the term court historians, because it comes as a tip of the hat to Professor Harry Elmer Barnes, who was a historian, and he was like a lot of these guys. He was a liberal in good standing in the 1920s. He wrote for the Nation, all the established, periodicals of the day. But he made the mistake of analyzing World War I and saying, damn, I mean, all these millions of people died, and I can't figure out why. There's really like no reason at all for World War I. Why did these millions of people die? It was a senseless slaughter, and because of that, they drummed him out of the community. He was cancel culture, couldn't get a job anywhere else. And he ended up his days as a revision, speaking to a revisionist historical conferences because nobody else would talk to him. But so he's the one that invented the term court historian. So I always use it in honor of him because he was one of the many victims of that, where he just, later we saw somebody like John Toland, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his biography on Hitler. He was a court historian in good standing, but he made the mistake of writing Infamy in the early 1980s, which was the first book to show conclusively, meticulously researched, that FDR knew in advance about Pearl Harbor. So what happened? Drummed out of the community. Barbara
Unbelievable, dude.
They called him a Nazi, which makes no sense at all. He wasn't writing at all about Germany. He was saying FDR knew about Pearl Harbor, but they still called him a Nazi. And again, he wound up his days speaking to revisionist historical conferences because nobody else would talk to him. So that's what happens. Thank goodness now we have an alternative media. Those guys didn't have an alternative. They, back then, Harry Elmer Barnes, they didn't have podcasts like yours. They could come on, or they would have been guests. But back then they just they don't have a job anymore. And you just we have to go talk to the Holocaust deniers. That's the only people that would talk to them, and it's very sad because it's I just laugh about it because tell me what my theory is. What's my anything in there that is it a theory that Muhammad Atta's passport floated down on top of obliterated metal and steel in 9/11? That's not a theory. They tell you that.
Yep.
So you explain it.
What was your theory on what? What was your theory, Don, on why World War I was started? What do you think the actual reason was?
Well, all I know is what they tell you. Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and somehow that precipitated a war where millions of people. And we had to get involved, and people like Eugene Debs, the great social people like that, protested, were thrown into jail, and as I said, the First Amendment became abridged because of that they can't really give a reason. I mean, when push comes to shove, if you debate one of these guys with it, they pretty much acknowledge, well, they'll come up with some gobbledygook, but there was no reason at all. And World War I was so important because, and it was really the first globalist venture. So whatever globalists were back then, whatever you want to call the people that run things, they pushed this thing for a reason. And World War I ensured that there would be a World War II because of the Treaty of Versailles. I explained how after the war, it really is the first time in history where the victors decided, hey, you know what, we're gonna find the losers. We're gonna make you guys pay.
Yeah.
So most people don't realize that after the war, they fined the hell out of Germany. Most Americans don't realize Germany did not stop paying reparations to the Allied nations for World War I until 2010. Now let that sink in for a minute. They paid reparations from. Good.
No, I couldn't believe what you just said.
Yeah, no,
and that's
it's amazing.
Why I get into. Go on, sorry, Don.
No, it's so. And once they did the Treaty of Versailles, what they did, and again, I'm not defending Hitler. I'm just telling you that on the surface, what they did is they took away provinces that were German. They took land from them. And they find him. So when if Hitler had died in like 1938, he would have been considered probably Germany's greatest leader. This is crazy. And because Germany had a worse depression than we did in the Great Depression. Germany was devastated. And he took them from the ashes. He built the Autobahn. He built the infrastructure up, and he got everybody a Heil Hitler, and they're all on board the same thing.
He also was the one that created the Reichstag event, where the parliamentary building was burned, and they blamed it on a leftist or communist named Marinus van der Lubbe, and he was later exonerated because he did not commit that crime, and this was under the direction of Adolf Hitler. And within days of that event happening, there was policies that were implemented to oppress people within his country further. And so the clear indicators of this guy being a dictator were, prevalent for years before 1939, 1945 period.
And, he did look around and blame the Jews for the media. And again, that's why if you look around today, would the situation be ripe for that? But he was pointing out because Germany in the 1920s, Berlin had a media that to some extent is like ours in terms of movies, and they were pushing the envelope constantly, in terms of sexuality and, kind of things that were offensive to Christians back then. So Hitler played on that. And with the Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, he wasn't. I try to tell the lovers of Hitler, now this guy wasn't just some guy that got up on a table in a beer hall and just, it took the country over by storm. Somebody was like, it's like AOC. You don't become a waitress and then go to Congress. That doesn't.
She
happen.
owned the
It's
bar,
impossible.
by the way.
So
Everyone tries to act like she just worked there. She owned the bar.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, I didn't know that. Really? Okay, but even as a bar owner, somebody has to back somebody like that. You don't get to. Her own brother said she auditioned for it. That's I've been trying to get that guy. You can't find him anywhere because I don't know. He probably wouldn't say it now, but that's what he said originally. Oh yeah, she auditioned for the role. They were casting a member of Congress, but once he did that, he was able to tell them, hey, look what they did to us. They fined us. They devastated the economy, and of course the Germans responded to that because they knew that had happened. But by that Treaty of Versailles, they guaranteed that that Germany would probably eventually revolt against that and say, hey, this is unfair, and try to take that land back, and try to Hitler, of course, because he was controlled, he obviously went beyond that, and we know what happened in terms of the rest of the war. But people, again, and then my book Crimes and Cover-ups, I talk about the trials of Nuremberg. Even today, they talk about COVID and everything else. We need a Nuremberg trials. No, that's the last thing we need. Again, that took the concept of finding the losers even farther. That's okay. For the first time in history, we win a war and we're going to put the losers on trial. We're going to legally prosecute them for losing a war. And that's what they did. And not all of them, just some of them.
Selective ones.
Like Toho of Japan, he didn't go on it. He lived on until late 1980s or something. Nobody talks about that. And of course, we know Werner von Braun, he went over and founded NASA under Operation Paperclip. So they were very selective. But the idea that you put people on trial, that's very, and at the time, there were lots of people that opposed that, including F. Kennedy, then Senator John F. Kennedy, the young guy to speak out against it. In his book, Profiles in Courage, again, most people don't know this. One of his profiles in courage was Senator Robert Taft, who was a Republican. And his chapter was about how Taft had the courage to call out the Nuremberg Convention for the farce it was. So, people think JFK was so different than any other Democrat that you can't imagine it. But that's something probably, I didn't know until I researched it.
There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot. You've dropped a lot of bombs on us right here, and I find it very interesting. Again, a lot of people don't understand that World War I, we see the establishing of the Bank of International Settlements, which becomes the centralized bank of all the centralized banks, and this bank is extracting wealth out of Germany at an insane number. Just destroying it, and which sets the environment up for somebody like Hitler to come up and rise. Now, again, in the book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, they break down not only all the corporations that were basically treating Hitler like a sugar baby, okay, but they also break down all the American corporations that were like set up basically boards of German companies. And one of the biggest one is
IG Farben.
Yeah. And how they had American board on this American board of IG Farben is heads of state Federal Reserves, like the New York State Federal Reserve. I mean, you can't be fighting the bankers while taking all their money at the same time.
No, and that's why, again, it's what happened was after this, and then as soon as World War II ends, you have the Nuremberg trials, and then instantly, again, and the vast majority of Americans don't know this, the Soviets, who had been our allies, Uncle Joe Stalin, one of the biggest murderers of all time, but hey, he's cool. Hitler's bad, but he's cool. He's some mass murders are more equal than others, to quote Orwell.
Yeah.
As soon as the war ends, suddenly, then the Soviets are the enemy. And Winston Churchill, again, drunken war criminal, is a guy that was drunk all the time and just, he wanted nothing but to bomb people nonstop. But he's a hero.
Not even just bomb. He wanted to implement biological chemical warfare on people as well, and that had to get revoked.
And he's a great hero. You bring the
whatever you want to call it. Stopped.
Yeah. Suddenly you have the Cold War, and I talked a lot about the phony Cold War in my book, and that's why and I'm going to go further into Joe McCarthy. And I'm trying to restore his reputation because the guy was a hero. He was not any kind of, and just to tell you how misrepresented he is, the word McCarthyism is, again, you ask the average American, they're so stupid. And they probably had some kind of dim recognition. Well, it must have been somebody named McCarthy. They don't know who it was, but they figure, well, I guess it was named after somebody named McCarthy. And but they don't know who it was. And the idea was he's like associated with the witch hunt that enveloped Hollywood, the blacklisting of the Hollywood 10 and all that, and people, weren't allowed to work anymore. And all that came from the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was run by a guy named J. Parnell Thomas, who no one's heard of. So if you want to demonize somebody, demonize him. McCarthy was in the Senate. He had nothing to do with anything with Hollywood, getting anybody fired, nothing, absolutely nothing to do. He was a genuine war hero. They called him Tail Gunner Joe. Friend of the Kennedy family. He was the godfather to RFK's oldest child, Kathleen Kennedy. And again, people don't know this. And he was trying to root out what he thought were Soviets in the army, especially. That's all he was doing. And because of that, the wrath came. And he was also the first so-called conspiracy theorist in public to call out FDR about Pearl Harbor. I found that out while researching this book as well. So he comes off pretty good, and he goes into Bethesda Naval Hospital at age 48 with a knee problem, dead 2 days later.
What?
No autopsy ever done. Instantly smeared as an alcoholic. So again, this is supposedly one of the great demons of the 20th century. Excuse me, you don't do an autopsy on a guy that dies of a knee issue at age 48. So that's what we're looking at. And this, he was buddies with James Forrestal. I talked about him in the previous book. Forrestal was Truman's Secretary of Defense, who was pushed out of a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital a few years before that. He was the fiercest critic of Israel. After he kept saying, Truman, this is idiotic, what he created here. And he was pushed out of a window, man. And before he died, I use this line all the time. In interviews, he told McCarthy, he said, McCarthy, if there wasn't this giant grand conspiracy, once in a while they'd make a mistake in our favor. That's a great line. If this is all random, yeah, they would once, there would be some good somewhere once in a while, somebody, but it never does because there's nothing random about it.
Yep. 100%. 100%, because it's
McCarthy
like
and Forrestal.
Basically, I used to tell Brian Callen that all the time. I'm like, Brian, if there wasn't a conspiracy, why do the people in power always get more power and more money at the end?
Yeah. So I'm running over. I wanted to share just a few things that I was going to pull up and share during the video, but it just got really interesting. So I was just rolling with it. I want to talk a bit about the Bolsheviks. Because that was mentioned a little bit. In history's bloodiest persecution of Christians, the Russian communists murder millions. I've talked about this a lot. but there's just a lot of similarities between then and now what's going on in certain areas of the world where people are targeting religious leaders and infrastructure and persecution of Christians. This was happening in the Soviet Union, across Europe and other areas, but yeah, the churches will not find anything exceptional about a church in the heart of Moscow, packed with people on a Sunday morning. But to simply read the name of the cathedral is to be reminded, consecrated on May 25th, 2017, by Patriarch Kirill from Vladimir Putin in attendance. It is called the Church of the Resurrection of Christ and the New Martyrs and Confessors of the Russian Church. Anyways, it's probably just talking about rebuilding. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 brought to power men who hated God and Christianity in all its forms. Lenin, who would end up being embalmed and put on display like a dead pope after his premature passing, once called the idea of God an unutterable vileness. The Russian Orthodox Church, as the chief repository of tradition and culture in Holy Mother Russia, had to be extinguished in order for the godless Soviet Union to rise from the ashes. The revolutionaries got to work as soon as they could. Over 12,000 clergy were murdered outright, shot, beaten to death, hanged, or drowned. And a secret 1930 police report put the number of Orthodox clergy who had died in prison camps at 42,800. There's millions of Christians that died during this like a certain time period. But it's just talking about like personal attacks also on targeted attacks on religious leaders. And then removing their infrastructure, their churches, places of worship. Yeah. The Bolsheviks went straight to work to silence these voices. John Kocherov, an archpriest in St. Petersburg, was murdered on October 31st. Metropolitan Vladimir of Kiev was strangled with the chain of his pectoral cross, together with the cautionary killings of Tsar Nikolai II, his wife, the crown prince, and his 4 beautiful daughters in the basement of the house they were imprisoned. It was a crimson beginning to a rising red sea of blood. Anyways, it goes on from here. Churches were blown up, vandalized, and smashed. Many broken churches still dot the Russian countryside today. Occasional instances of outraged resistance by the faithful were often effective. At the time, the Bolsheviks preferred not to turn the people against them by opening fire. They first needed to solidify their position politically. They were already outlawing religious observance, a law that was met by another wave of defiant martyrs. And even the Holodomor event, I've talked about these on Rumble, Don189, earlier videos, but let's see what comes up when I talk about that. Yeah. Not just Ukrainian Christians, but Christians throughout the Soviet Union. The Holodomor, also known as Ukrainian famine, was a man-made famine in Soviet Ukraine from 1932 to 1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians, Christian Ukrainians that were targeted. Man-made. This was government implemented mass starvation of millions of people, and they knew what they were doing, unfortunately. So this is why, lest we forget, like, we need to talk about these things. And then staged and planned false flag events that have happened since. There's so many. I've talked about the Challenger incident yet again just recently. I might have, I'll pull it up. Go to my profile. I might have shared it on a story already. Yeah, I did. Okay. Again, for anyone that knows that this has been shared by me over the years multiple times, bear with me. This is for new viewers. So January 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into flight, killing all 7 crew members. So 73 times 37 is 2701. And you've got the 2, the 7, the 0, the 1 that are used in that are often used as a universal numbering system or language for certain groups that make these events of significance and where there needs to be further observations, because they might be things that are staged and planned or bullshit, as you'll see here. But so even with 9/11, for example, it was towers 1, 2, and 7 that went down, and they called it ground zero. So you've got the 1, the 2, the 0, the 7 in that as well. And so when you look at those numbers. It's like, pay attention to this. Like, it's not exactly what's being told on TV. Shocker. Spoiler alert. It's not. I've shared interviews, well, not interviews, I guess, but people that have them on the record on camera, even in recent past, in the last few years, and irrefutable evidence of these people being exposed, including looking at dental records and comparisons, scars, talking to people and doing research on like so much. Yeah. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. Just in case, I'll share again. Sometimes I close things down without properly. Yeah, go down that rabbit hole. Anyway, I will leave it at that. I'm almost 2 hours in. So on that note, I will leave it like that, like I just said. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.